Hey listeners, last year was our 15th year of the best in food storytelling. As we head into 2025, we're kicking off a contest in collaboration with the podcast series Feast and Harmony and Sixth Man, where you have the opportunity to win a 4-night cruise for 2 on Chefs Making Waves, a food, wine, and spirits festival at sea. When you donate to HRN, you'll be entered for the chance to win a porthole cabin for 2 on Chefs Making Waves, sailing May 5th through 9th, 2025, from Miami to Cozumel, Mexico on Norwegian Gem. You'll also support another year of great food storytelling with a portion of your donation going toward disaster relief for the food and beverage communities within Western North Carolina and Southern California. This cruise is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for culinary adventurers, featuring top celebrity chefs including Jonathan Waxman, Antonio Lafaso, Robert Irvine, and many, many more. There's a myriad of experiences such as restaurant takeovers, live food and mixology demos, themed parties, and more. To enter your chance to win, please visit heritageradionetwork.org/cruise. Terms and conditions apply. You must be 21 or over to enter. That's heritageradionetwork.org/cruise.
You're listening to Heritage Radio Network.
People started asking the question at that time a lot. Where does your food come from? But they weren't necessarily asking, where does your seed come from? And I think that's still, in a lot of farmers markets today, is still the case, right? That it's like people are really interested in where the food comes from, but not where the seed comes from.
Do you remember the last time you bought a package of seeds? Many of us have seen those beautiful racks of seed packets at the hardware store, promising us juicy tomatoes and crispy lettuce. Seed breeders like Sarah Klieger, who you heard from at the top of the episode, are to thank for those. And you can definitely grow food from those seeds. But you might be asking yourself why your friend in California always gets better, sweeter tomatoes, or how the same seed that you planted in your garden gives your mom big, beautiful heads of romaine in hers, but barely gives you one salad. Maybe it's that mythical green thumb. Or maybe it's something more. In today's episode, we'll be opening up some of those seed packets and finding out where they really come from and what their future holds. I'm Taylor Early, and this is Meat and 3 on HRN.
Meat and 3.
Meat and 3.
Meat and 3.
One meat, 3 sides.
Food, news, and storytelling.
A square meal. For your ears.
Meat and 3.
For our first story, Bean Metcalf takes us to her hometown in the Willamette Valley, where the local seed industry is thriving.
A few years back, Sarah Klieger decided to grow some kale. She planted 2 varieties, side by side in her field. And while they look like the same plant from the outside, the seeds were sourced from 2 very different places.
There's a lacinato kale from Uprising Seeds up in Washington, and then from Siskiyou Seeds down in Southern Oregon.
At first, it looked like the plants from Southern Oregon were more successful. They thrived in the hot, dry summer, producing beautiful, edible leaves, while the Washington plants just kind of survived. But then the seasons shifted. The days got shorter and cooler, the rain started falling, and, well...
The one from Southern Oregon drowned in our field, and the one from Washington just, charged it right through the winter and wound up providing a lot more food. You know, these 2 lines of the same variety had adapted different abilities based on the place that they had grown. And, you know, seeds and plants do this in ways that, we don't understand and see, most of the time.
You or I may not see it most of the time, but this is what Sarah does for a living. She is the co-founder of Adaptive Seeds, a farm-direct, certified organic seed company based outside of Sweet Home, Oregon. While seed farming might sound idyllic and peaceful, it's an industry subject to the same monopolistic practices that plague the rest of the food industry. This is concerning for a variety of reasons, but most vital in my mind is the impact that this has on food resiliency. There has been a distinct shift in farming to growing genetically identical, high-yielding monocrops. With the lack of biodiversity comes an increased risk of mass crop failure, widespread disease, and genetic erosion. But luckily, local growers are fighting back in the most organic way possible. Meet Michaela Hammer, the owner of Humming Bee Nursery.
If you're growing plants and looking through seed catalogs for things to grow,
a lot of the choices that you have for varieties to grow have been bred in the Midwest, on the East Coast, and they might be really good varieties and they might perform well here.
But if you get a variety that was actually bred here in the Pacific Northwest, or better yet, the Willamette Valley,
those plants are going to do better and grow better for people. They're going to produce better. They're going to resist disease, be better adapted to our climate.
People like Michaela are working from the literal ground up to provide organic, locally adapted varieties of plants to her community. Because the quality and success of any plant starts way before you harvest its fruits or flowers. It starts with the seeds and the soil.
We're using compost and adding mycorrhizal fungi to it, and then also adding fertilizer to the soil. And so the soil itself is biologically active. And so in some ways, when you plant an organic start that's grown in that way, you're inoculating your garden soil with all of that too.
The resilience of plants and their ability to produce food or flowers comes not just from seed variety, but from the health and quality of the soil.
Hopefully you're preparing your garden in an organic way and really encouraging soil biodiversity and activity, biological activity. But even if you're not, by putting our soil in the ground with your plants, hopefully you're kind of inoculating the soil with more beneficial bacteria and nematodes and fungi and all the things that make soil alive.
It's impossible to really separate any step of the food growing process because each impacts the next. Think back to those 2 kales. Before the seeds were even planted, they had a roadmap for success printed on their genetic material. One preferred warm, dry climates, and the other thrived in cool, wet weather. Our world is changing, and our food systems will have to change with it. So the question becomes, what does that change look like?
I think that there's really just something to be said for seed coming from a place where people have relationships with the crops. At Adaptive Seeds, we're planting the crops. We do mostly hand cultivation. We're out there with stirrup hose. Everything gets weeded 3 times. We're looking at our crops all the time, looking for what excels and taking out things that are sick or might be off types. And a lot of the larger scale seed production, they just can't do that.
I like to think that the future is local. And then when we look forward, we can see strong, resilient communities growing food together.
I really have hope that, because the small breeders and small producers are a key part of everything. But when it comes down to it, the home gardeners kind of democratizing that production is really important. So I think, there's the small scale commercial side of things that's really, really vital.
I hope that people like Michaela and Sarah will continue to steward this network of growers and breeders, and will keep bringing beautiful, successful varieties of plants to the local market. Because when we buy food, we're not just choosing what kind of vegetable to cook. We're choosing what kind of future we want. And the future that I want is rich with biodiversity, a robust local food system that can weather the storms ahead.
And unfortunately, those storms are just getting worse. So how do we navigate seed farming during the climate crisis? For our next story, seeking some guidance, Taylor Graham speaks with Lane Selman, founder of the Culinary Breeding Network, to discuss the state of organic plant farming.
Established in 2011, the Culinary Breeding Network fosters a growing community of plant breeders, seed growers, farmers, and chefs who share their stories at public events. These include the network's variety showcases, where chefs and organic plant breeders gather to share their seeds with unique dishes at display tables. Having studied agriculture and worked in farming her entire life, Lane often linked up with farmers who didn't think much about seeds. Still, she considers the seed to be the powerhouse of the plant.
I think that sometimes that is even for growers, a lot of them don't know much about this totally hidden world and really the power. There's so much power in it because as a farmer, you're thinking a lot about your environment, right? You're thinking about water, you're thinking about your soil, you're thinking about all these different things. But really, you're going to have to start with the very best genetics possible. That is the seed.
Now, the bad news is climate change threatens our environment, and therefore the seed. But the good news is the farmers Lane has worked with for the last 15 to 20 years have been breeding seeds that can withstand harsher conditions for some time.
They have been selecting for and creating varieties that perform really well in a chaotic climate kind of reality that we're having now. They've always been addressing resilience. They've always been selecting under harsher conditions to make sure that their plants are thriving in this type of unknown future, I guess.
And if you're worried about flavor, organic and delicious are not mutually exclusive. It just comes down to what you're selecting for.
For me, the Culinary Breeding Network is about finding those varieties and working with plant breeders that are creating varieties that perform really well in organic systems and also taste good.
At the end of the day, Lane believes that CBN's and other seed companies' plant breeding processes, suited to organic systems, naturally curtail the effects of the climate crisis.
With everything, there's a ton of concern about climate change. The seed companies that have been very much focused on breeding for organic systems, I feel like really go hand in hand. And the way that they are growing in an organic system, it's about putting the plants to the test. It's like not giving them everything that they need. And in that way, it just creates varieties, plant populations of plants that are more resilient in general.
Through creating a collaborative plant breeding community and discovering organic varieties, CBN is working to develop a more resilient food system, one seed at a time.
We'll be sowing more seeds on Meat and 3 after a brief break.
This episode is brought to you by Wisconsin Cheese. Wisconsin, the state of cheese, makes half of the nation's specialty cheese and wins more awards than any other state or country. Our heritage and traditions, master cheesemaker program, and the American propensity for innovation all put Wisconsin on the cutting edge of cheesemaking. With over 600 varieties of cheese to choose from and 5,500 national and international awards and counting, get ready to turn your refrigerator into a trophy case. Enjoying a Wisconsin cheese is basically like winning a gold medal in culinary achievement. Set your mind at cheese. When you bite into a wedge of Wisconsin Wonderful, you know it is made with the ultimate skill and passion possible. Find your next favorite cheese at wisconsincheese.com.
Welcome back to Meat and 3, Seed Savers. This year, our reporter Ash Tyler is going to be a first-time gardener. On her journey to cultivating a green thumb, she recently visited a local seed swap event to grab seeds and find inspiration for her future garden.
When I moved last May, I was so excited about the community garden nearby, until I realized all the plots were taken. As the season passed, I walked by sprawling squash, towering tomato trellises, and patches of peppers on my daily walks, just dreaming of my own little garden. Now it's 2025, and I'm ready to grow. I don't know what color my thumb is, but I know I'll need seeds to find out. Luckily, January 25th was National Seed Swap Day, and I headed to an event hosted by Edible Chicago and the Seed Savers Exchange to learn more. I even asked local gardeners why they save seeds.
It was less costly. Mm-hmm. It is a huge savings to do a seed swap.
Overall, saving your own seeds is pretty cheap.
Saving money sounds like music to my ears. While many talked about the economics of seed saving, they also talked about how gardening is a community where everyone naturally shares what they have left over.
A seed packet has up to 50 or 100 seeds. If you split it up, you could share it between like 5 or 6 people. You don't always need all the seeds that you have. Grow what you need and then share the rest.
For others, like Dominique Jackson, the act of seed saving is tied to food sovereignty and protecting their local communities. She talked about how a few agrochemical companies control more than 50% of the seeds on the market.
I thought that concentration was pretty dangerous for the rest of us. And so I decided to get into the fight and start doing some seed saving, educating myself and my community.
Dominique is the owner of the startup From Gardens to Picnics. She and her colleague Rikar Pasha came to the event to meet other folks interested in cultivating organic seeds.
Our objective is to create a structure between the urban agribusiness and family life.
The more of these heirloom variety open pollinated seeds that are out here in our environment and in our biodiversity, the better it is.
And they weren't the only ones with the environment and community on their minds. Like Paul Kreisek, a farm manager at Just Root Chicago.
A lot of the seed companies nowadays don't do the best practices for the environment. And I think food sovereignty is your thing. I think that one of the easiest ways that you can help out is to grow your own food and also share that food and seeds with people in your community.
On my way out, I tossed tiny bags of watermelon, Cherokee purple tomato, and Chinese mallow seeds in my purse. I left with the knowledge that my first garden can be more than just a new hobby. It's a way to connect to the broader community, start my own seed-saving traditions, and create small acts of food sovereignty on my block.
So, maybe you got your seeds from a seed swap, the hardware store, or even your local plant nursery. In any case, if you're an aspiring first-time gardener like Ash, there are some things you might need to consider. For our last story, our resident California native Jessie Nicely looks into a unique seed sowing situation. In other words, what we should and shouldn't do after a wildfire.
In the early days of January 2025, Los Angeles was ravaged by the Palisade and Eaton fires, which burned over 16,000 structures and nearly 40,000 acres of land.
Hurricane-force winds drove the flames directly into the neighborhood, reducing many homes to ashes.
Another factor, extra dry conditions this year, an excess fuel load in the area.
This entire perimeter here was up in flames, and you can see none of these houses survived here. It is beyond devastation.
Entire cities were wiped off the map, and untold numbers of Angelenos were displaced. The city of Altadena, a historic Black enclave, was hit especially hard by the Eaton fire.
The city was one of the first within the 60s to allow Black families to move in, but also a large population of Black families that owned their homes.
A good number of our family are now displaced.
The destruction caused by these fires has been devastating. And while a majority of recovery efforts have focused on clearing and rebuilding affected urban areas, large parts of the acreage consumed by the Eaton fire contain the Eaton Canyon Nature Area and huge swaths of Angeles National Forest. Following the destruction of so much wildland, many Californians are asking how and to what extent should we get involved in the recovery of burn areas. The plant growth booms and busts caused by California drought cycles and exacerbated by climate change have left residents living in prime fire conditions.
The last 2 winters have been very prolific in terms of rain and mountain snow, and that caused vegetation to green up. And then when it's been dry in the last several months, it all dried out and created a tinderbox.
These conditions have proliferated across the state and have led to more frequent and destructive fires. And to top things off, the loss of plant life on hills and mountains post-fire has led to deadly landslides and further destruction in affected areas.
The last few weeks have brought particular climate whiplash to residents of the Pacific Palisades and Altadena burn zones as properties that survived the fires now became threatened by the floods.
So of course it makes sense that residents would want to immediately begin the process of reseeding and regrowth. But is that desire to help nature move things along actually good for the environment? Historically, California has always had wildfires, and they play a crucial part in the cycles of animal and plant life. Native plants, such as Matilla hop poppies and lodgepole pines, have evolved to the point of needing fire or smoke to trigger germination and the dropping of seeds.
A lot of our plants here in California need fire. What we would call pyrophiles are actually, they need that fire in order to either open their fruit or their cone.
In the past, the California Department of Forestry and Fire Protection, also known as CAL FIRE, would send out planes filled with grass seed to fly over burn areas, but more recent studies by the U.S. Forest Service have found that this seeding, even with native plants, was rarely effective and could even lead to the crowding out of other plants vital to the regrowth of the burned areas.
So how can we as Californians best support the process of ecological recovery in a post-fire environment? Well, the best approach is really to do nothing. Recovery will happen over time, and what you can do is simply appreciate the beauty in that transition.
While taking a hands-off approach seems to be the best way to handle wildlands affected by fires, there's still plenty that can be done by residents in urban recovery areas. In the aftermath of a fire, the California Natural Plant Society's Fire Recovery Guide recommends taking this as a chance to invest in restorative and defensive landscaping. This ranges from creating an ember-resistant zone by moving all combustibles at least 5 feet away from homes to maintaining a drought-resistant garden.
Hydrated and well-maintained native foliage is going to be slower to ignite and burn. Smartly chosen plants, well-spaced and placed, can actually be protective in the landscape.
The use of native seeds and plants creates a garden equipped for the extreme cycles of California weather while also sustaining critical local ecosystems. Often the same plants that can protect homes during fire also help support native pollinators and other species. The restoration process for Altadena and the Palisades will likely be a years-long effort, but eventually, through the work of the community and local ecologists, these cities will return, along with the natural beauty that drew so many to them in the first place.
All right, seed savers, that's our show. Thanks for listening. Now that we know better, hopefully we can grow better. And just a reminder that the crisis in LA is far from over and recovery efforts will be long-term. So please head over to our show notes to learn more about how you can support the rebuilding and regrowing process. This episode of Meat and Three was reported by Bean Metcalf, Ash Tyler, Jessie Nicely, and Taylor Graham. Our lead producer on this episode was Bean Metcalf. Our executive producers are H. Conley and me, Taylor Early. Our audio engineer is Sam Gerardi. Our theme song was composed by Breakmaster Cylinder. This program is supported in part by public funds from the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs, in partnership with the City Council. Meat and Three is powered by Simplecast. Meat and Three is a production of Heritage Radio Network, the world's pioneer food radio station. Learn more at heritageradionetwork.org and follow us at heritage_radio and at meaty.gram. If you haven't already, don't forget to sign up for our new and improved HRN newsletter. You can find the link in the show notes. And please stay in touch, whether you have a story idea or would just like to say hey. Write us at ideas@meatand3.nyc, and that's all spelled out.